Hello and welcome to Monday's episode of Trending at the brand new time of 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I hope you had a fantastic weekend, whatever you're up to and wherever you are in the world. If you managed to check out Renegade, David's life story film, which we had released on the channel on Saturday, I hope you enjoyed it. And Guy Anderson on Bring the Fire yesterday. Another fascinating conversation. There's another one coming this week. If you want more of what we do, head over to iconic.com and sign up for your first month for just £1.99. Hundreds and hundreds of hours of material going back to 1995. Original series, original films, and weekly shows that you'll get nowhere else. So head over to iconic.com, as I say, $1.99 for your first month. Right, let's dive into this morning's breaking or trending news stories, no pun intended. There's a major summit or organization meeting going on in the Far East at the moment where the Russian, Chinese and Indian leaders are all there at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in the port city of Tianjin. It's the first time for 7 years that the Indian Prime Minister or Indian President has gone into China. And it's led to a few news stories and conversations around cooperation between those countries. So as we know, over the last few years, geopolitically, Russia has been pushed more and more and more to the outside. They were kicked out of the G8, which is now the G7. They've had sanctions imposed upon them because of the war in Ukraine, and they've been further and further isolated on the international stage. Now, what that has done is that has pushed them closer and closer to their natural partner in China. Now, the reason that this is important is because it creates a East versus West narrative, which is exactly what has been long predicted will bring about the Third World War. To take you on a tangent or take you on a small backstory, many of you may have heard of somebody called Albert Pike. If you haven't, I will explain the reason for bringing him up. Albert Pike was a 33rd degree Freemason, which is the highest level of the Scottish Rite of Freemason. Officially, I'm sure there's levels above that, but officially 33rd degree is the highest. He wrote a letter where he was talking and describing 3 world wars. Now, this letter was discovered after the Second World War, so the validity and accuracy of it really depends on what it wrote about the third. But it described the first 2 world wars in great accuracy as to how they happened. And then the Third World War, it described as East versus West. David, my dad, has long written about the plan to use Russia and China to create global conflict, in creating a NATO against Russia, China, and maybe a few allies chucked in there like Iran and North Korea, used to create this bogeyman type scenario where East and West are in conflict. It's becoming more and more clear that power is shifting to the East. We're seeing the destruction of Western societies in a number of different ways, whether that be economically, as we're seeing in America with the dollar that is basically collapsing. We're seeing more and more cost of living crisis in Western countries. We're also seeing more and more social crisis in Western countries, whether that be through immigration, whether that be through the cost of living, whether that be through health crisis, whatever it might be. We're seeing more and more destruction of Western societies and more power and influence going east. You know, I remember when I was a kid, people would make jokes about something you were holding in your house or a toy you'd been bought or something you would, whatever. And it would be, where's that made? Made in China, made in Taiwan, made in Indonesia. You know, these things were made in the East. The production of pretty much everything has gone further and further east in the last few decades, to the point where the Western societies and Western countries don't really produce anything. So therefore, we are incredibly beholden and incredibly reliant on those nations, which it seems we want to go to war with, the universal we there, which makes no sense. So there's lots of theories about this third world conflict, about the fact that it's going to be a hot war, it's going to be literally fighting an actual war, or could it just be a psychological one? Because as I mentioned, the influence and the power that these Eastern countries have for supply chains, for Western nations, for various different things, not just, you know, toys and accessories and things like that, but for medical supplies, for things as important as that, for this computer I'm holding right now, for the microphone I'm talking to you through, for the television you're probably watching this on. All these things are reliant on Eastern supply chains. So if there was a global conflict in an East versus West scenario, the potential for disruption, the potential for catastrophic side effects, other than just conflict, is enormous, absolutely enormous. And they know this. They know this. This is part of the plan. So that's why there's conversations and suggestions that, does the Third World War literally need to be this nuclear apocalypse that's predicted? Or does it just need to be the threat of that? And this trade war that we're seeing starting to to take place between East versus West. Well, the US versus others, which is why this summit is very important. So the leaders of China and India say that they're now deepening trust between the two nations after years of tension, including a long-running border dispute. Russian President Vladimir Putin is also at the summit, attended by more than 20 world leaders, which this year has been overshadowed by the trade war in the US. Now, the US have imposed enormous sanctions and tariffs, I should say, on imports from India. And they've done the same in China, although he's backtracked on that because, as I said, the reliance for American trade and American production on Chinese involvement is massive. So they'd be kind of destroying their own economy. That is the idea, but he has to do that in a certain way. If he does it so openly, people, even the closest Trump allies, may start to ask a few questions. But also what this seems to be doing to me is it's cozying up those nations closer and closer and closer as Western nations are starting to fall apart, starting to be pulled apart. There is anger and resentment from Britain, for example, towards the French for the way that they are enabling this migrant crisis that we're seeing to happen, despite billions and billions of taxpayer money going to the French to patrol to police patrols on the beaches. They don't seem to be happening, and they're actually aiding this. So there's resentment towards that. Whereas all of a sudden and there's other examples of that as well. But you're seeing in the East, you're seeing nations get pushed closer and closer and closer together to create this common, in a sense, what we talked about on this program, which is this common grouping against a common enemy. These nations might not all agree on everything, but they know together they're stronger than they are apart, and therefore together they can achieve more in pushing back against this Western dominant New World Order. Now, that's part of the agenda. That's absolutely part of the agenda. We have seen power move east and east and east in so many different examples. You've seen militarily the power move east. You've seen economically the power move east. You've seen in terms of the destruction of Western societies, you've seen power move east. All these things are benefiting that we are seeing in these countries here in the West, the destruction of them. They are all benefiting those Eastern nations. So it's a very, very interesting thing to see when you watch this. And this is, obviously very much a trending news story this morning. It's one of the things on Twitter that lots and lots of people are talking about. What does this mean for peace in Ukraine? What does this mean for these trade wars? What does it mean for me? People are starting to understand more that the way that these countries behave dictates what happens at home because of the growing influence that they have had over supply chains, over production, over world order. That's not done by accident. That's done completely by design. And it's something that I think you're going to see more and more talks of over the next 2 or 3 days, what comes out from these discussions, what may be announced, what policies and procedures may be put in place to counteract what they see as Western dominance. It's going to be interesting to see what happens because, like I said on Friday's episode, it felt a couple of weeks ago or a week or so ago to anyone looking at it from just, a completely this is what's happening perspective rather than knowing anything deeper or the nuances of what was going on. It felt like you were relatively close to peace in Ukraine. It felt like you were relatively close to the US and Russia normalizing relations and starting to get on, and an end to this potential of a conflict at any point, one catalyzing event away from a conflict at all times. This fear of looking on the news, wondering what you're going to wake up to when it comes to this subject. It felt like those fears were easing slightly within people. All of a sudden now, since then, you've seen Russian bombardment of Ukraine continue, which then seems to put that peace deal very much on the back seat. Peace has not been talked about again since. You've seen Zelensky refute any suggestions of giving up land. And all of a sudden, what seemed quite close seems now far away, which you could tie into this whole concept in psychology of giving people hope, hopium as they call it, which is where you think you get, oh no, we're going to strip it away. So you think you're at the point you want to be at, you think you're at the point you can relax, and then they're just going to pull you straight back in again. And then that emotional response of fear and anxiety of not knowing what the future holds all of a sudden is then back, and it feels even worse because you feel like you were so close to the end of it. I don't know. It's a very interesting perspective, a very interesting thing to observe what's going on, because there is so many different plays on the international circuit, and there are so many different plays behind this agenda to take the human race and take the planet in a certain direction, that they're all playing their own different roles to it, and different parts of the world and different nations are playing their different roles, and you know, certain parts of the agenda are further ahead in other nations, further behind in others, but other parts of the agenda are further ahead in this one and they're further behind in that one. So it's a very interesting time to be alive. And I know, you know, it may be a very scary time to be alive. I completely understand and concur with that, especially if you have a young family and you're wondering what the world that you're going to leave behind, or the world that you're going to live in for the majority of it, is going to be like. But it's also a very interesting and exciting time, because more and more people are open to the fact the world isn't quite how they thought it was. They might not be looking in the right directions yet, but they're at least open-minded to the fact the world is not how they thought it was, which is a real progress from 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So that's exciting. And we have much more potential to make an impact and make a change to the planet than we did have 5 to 10 years ago, because more people are seeing it, and growing numbers are actually not just seeing it, they're prepared to do something about it and stand up for what is right and push back against what they consider to be the wrong direction of travel. So we do live in interesting times, but we do live in exciting times, and we'll see what evolves with this story. Right, if you're watching with us online, then thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching with us on iconic.com, then we're going to carry on now and dive into a few more stories. So if you want to carry on and listen to the rest of this show, the members version over on Iconic, then click the link in the description and head over and start your first month for $1.99 and continue watching and get the full episode every single morning, as well as thousands of hours of other content.